Story 1. The Witness Trail. Marcus Chen started the Blood Mountain approach on a Tuesday morning in late September, the kind of crystalline autumn day that made the Appalachian Trail feel like a cathedral. He'd been section hiking for 3 years, chipping away at Georgia whenever work allowed. The trail was empty, which suited him fine. He preferred solitude to the forced camaraderie of shelter conversations. Around mile marker 4, he noticed the other hiker. A man in his 60s maybe, with a weathered pack and the unhurried gait of someone who'd walked thousands of miles. They exchanged nods at a water crossing. Marcus pushed ahead, maintaining his pace. But at every overlook, every trail junction, every brief rest stop, the older hiker was there. Not following exactly, just present. Always arriving moments after Marcus, always departing moments before. They never spoke beyond basic trail courtesies. The man's eyes had a peculiar quality, an intense focus that made Marcus uncomfortable. By the third day, Marcus realized something was wrong. The hiker wasn't just on the same section, he was witnessing. Every time Marcus stumbled, the man was there. Every water break, every moment Marcus sat to adjust his boots, the hiker observed from a discreet distance, not hiking his own trail, hiking Marcus's trail. On day 4, Marcus deliberately took a wrong turn at Neal Gap, descending on a blue blaze side trail that looped away from the main AT. He hiked for 2 hours down the alternate route, confident he'd finally separated from his shadow. When he stopped for lunch at a small creek, he heard footsteps. The older man emerged from the tree line, made eye contact, and sat on a rock 30 feet away. He pulled out a small notebook and began writing, glancing up at Marcus periodically. Marcus's hands shook as he packed his gear. He hiked faster, pushing through the afternoon until his knees ached and his pack straps cut into his shoulders. He didn't stop at the planned shelter. He pushed another 5 miles to a campsite he'd never intended to reach, arriving after dark. He set up his tent by headlamp, crawled inside, and immediately killed the light. In the darkness, he heard the familiar sound of a pack being set down, the rustle of a tent being erected. The older man had arrived. Marcus lay rigid in his sleeping bag, listening to every sound outside. The man moved with practiced efficiency, his camp setup completed in minutes. Then silence. Marcus didn't sleep. At first light, he packed without heating breakfast and started hiking before dawn, not bothering to break camp properly. He left his tent stakes behind in his hurry. The trail wound through dense rhododendron thickets, the morning fog so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. Perfect conditions for disappearing. But when he emerged from the fog belt 2 hours later, there was the man. Sitting on a fallen log beside the trail, notebook open, pen moving. Across the page. He didn't look up as Marcus passed. That's when Marcus started running. Not jogging, but full panicked sprinting, pack bouncing violently against his back, trekking poles abandoned. He ran until his lungs burned and his vision blurred, ran until he tripped over a root and crashed face first into the trail. He lay there gasping, tasting blood from a split lip, and heard footsteps approaching. The older man stopped beside him. Marcus looked up, expecting to finally confront his stalker, but the man's expression held no malice, only a deep, unbearable sadness. He reached down, not to help Marcus up, but to place something on the ground beside him. A laminated card, worn at the edges. Then he walked past, continuing up the trail. Marcus grabbed the card with shaking hands. It was a missing person flyer. The photo showed a young man in his 20s with Marcus's exact features, same narrow face and dark eyes. The name read Daniel Chen, age 23 when he disappeared on the Appalachian Trail in 1997, last seen at Blood Mountain. Marcus's father's name was Daniel, the father who died before Marcus was born, whom his mother never discussed. The father whose hiking gear Marcus had inherited, whose trail journal he'd read as a teenager, whose dream of completing the AT had inspired Marcus's own journey. He looked up the trail where the older man had gone, but saw no one. Marcus's phone had no signal, but he'd photographed the card. That night at the next shelter, he got 1 bar of service and searched for Daniel Chen's disappearance. The articles were there, archived in old newspaper databases. His father had vanished without a trace during a solo hike. Search parties found nothing. His mother, pregnant at the time, had moved away from Georgia and never returned. The older hiker appeared at the shelter after dark. He didn't enter, just stood at the tree line, barely visible in the shadows. Marcus could see him writing in that notebook, pen moving steadily. After an hour, he disappeared into the darkness. Marcus hiked out the next morning, abandoning his section hike plan. He drove straight to the Trail Association office in Dahlonega and asked about the missing persons database. The volunteer showed him files going back decades. Daniel Chen's case was there, along with hundreds of others. People who'd walked into the Appalachian wilderness and never walked out. But there was another file that made Marcus's blood freeze. The volunteer pulled it out almost apologetically. A recent report from another hiker filed just 2 weeks earlier. A man named Robert Thompson had reported being followed by an older hiker who seemed to be documenting his every move. Thompson had felt increasingly paranoid and had left the trail early. He'd included a description that matched Marcus's witness exactly. The volunteer mentioned that 3 other hikers had reported similar experiences over the past 2 years. All had been in their 20s. All had been solo hikers on the Georgia section. All had described the same older man with the notebook. Marcus asked if they'd investigated. The volunteer gave him a weary look. The trail was hundreds of miles long, passing through wilderness where people could disappear for weeks. They'd sent rangers to look but found nothing. No permits, no registration, no identification. Just reports from spooked hikers who'd gotten uncomfortable and bailed out. That night, Marcus drove to his mother's house in Ohio. She was in her 60s now, still refusing to discuss his father. But Marcus pushed, showing her the missing person flyer, telling her about the older hiker. His mother's face went pale. She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a box Marcus had never seen before. Inside were letters, dozens of them addressed to his mother, all from the same person. They'd arrived over the years, always postmarked from different towns along the Appalachian Trail. No return address. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Each letter contained observations about hikers, descriptions of their gear, their pace, their habits, and questions, always questions, asking if any of them might be his son. The letters were signed with his father's name. The most recent had arrived 3 months ago, postmarked from Dahlonega, Georgia. His mother finally told him the truth. Daniel Chen hadn't simply disappeared. He'd had a breakdown on the trail, some kind of psychotic episode triggered by isolation and exhaustion. When the search parties were looking for him, he was hiding, convinced that leaving the trail meant erasing himself from existence. By the time the search was called off, he'd been in the wilderness for months. He'd become something else. Someone who couldn't leave, who couldn't stop hiking, who'd been walking the same sections for nearly 3 decades. Marcus's mother had received letters from other hikers over the years, people who'd encountered a strange older man on the trail. She'd tried to get help, tried to organize a search, but her husband didn't want to be found. He just wanted to witness, to document, to maybe someday recognize the son he'd never met. Marcus returned to the trail 2 weeks later. He hiked the Blood Mountain section again, this time deliberately slow, making himself visible. He camped at the same sites, followed the same route, and on the 4th day, he saw him. The older man was sitting at a vista point, notebook open, waiting. Marcus approached slowly. Up close, he could see the weathering on the man's face. the decades of exposure carved into deep lines. The resemblance was undeniable. They had the same hands, the same way of tilting their heads when thinking. Marcus sat down beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Marcus said, "I'm your son." The older man's pen stopped moving. His hand began to shake. He looked at Marcus with eyes that held 3 decades of wilderness and isolation and searching. Then he closed the notebook, carefully placed it in his pack, and stood up. Marcus expected him to speak, to explain, to acknowledge. But the man just shouldered his pack and started walking north on the trail. After a few steps, he paused and looked back. Not an invitation exactly, more like a question. Marcus understood. His father couldn't leave the trail. It was his life now, his entire existence. The wilderness had claimed him so completely that the real world no longer had meaning. But he could share it. He could hike it with someone who understood. Marcus made his decision. He called his office from the next town and quit his job. He sold his apartment, put his belongings in storage, and returned to the trail. He's been hiking with his father for 8 months now. They rarely speak, communicating mostly through the rhythm of their footsteps and the silent language of experienced hikers. His father still carries the notebook, still writes observations about other hikers they encounter. But he doesn't follow them anymore. He has someone to witness now. Someone who chose to join him in the endless walking, the perpetual journey that never ends because ending would mean confronting all those lost years. Marcus knows he can leave whenever he wants. His father wouldn't stop him. But every morning when he wakes up in his tent and hears his father already packing for the day's hike, he makes the choice to stay. Some people search for their parents their whole lives. Marcus found his father by becoming him, by surrendering to the same wilderness that had swallowed a young man 30 years ago. They're still out there. If you hike the Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail and see 2 men with the same narrow face and dark eyes walking together but rarely speaking, you've found them. Don't approach. Don't ask questions. They're not hiking the trail anymore. They've become part of it, witnesses to everyone else's journey, unable to complete their own. Story 2. The Forgetting Tree. Sarah Whitmore had hiked the Vermont section of the long trail 3 times before, always in summer when the mud season had passed and the trails were manageable. This trip was different. She'd come in early April when the snow was mostly melted but the tourist crowds hadn't arrived. She wanted solitude to think through her pending divorce, to make decisions without her lawyer's voice in her head. The trail was harder than she remembered. Spring runoff had turned sections into streams, forcing her to bushwhack around flooded areas. Her boots were perpetually soaked, but the difficulty was clarifying. Physical exhaustion left no room for emotional spiraling. On day 3, she took a wrong turn. The trail markers became inconsistent, some blazes so faded they were barely visible. Her GPS showed her position drifting away from the marked trail, but there was a clear path ahead, well-worn and obvious. She followed it, assuming it would reconnect with the main trail within a mile or 2. The path led to a massive tree, a sugar maple, ancient and enormous, its trunk wider than Sarah could wrap her arms around. The bark had unusual markings, deep gouges that formed patterns almost like writing. She'd never seen anything like it in 3 previous trips through this area. Sarah checked her GPS again. According to the satellite, she was standing on the long trail itself, though she knew that couldn't be right. The main trail ran a 1/4 mile east according to her previous waypoints. She decided to break for lunch, sit against the massive tree, and study her maps. The moment her back touched the trunk, she felt it. A strange pulling sensation, like standing up too fast, but in her mind rather than her body. The forest seemed to tilt slightly. She jerked away from the tree, her heart pounding. She looked at her GPS. The device showed her position, the date, the time. April 14th, 2023, 1:47 p.m. But something felt wrong. She couldn't remember what she'd eaten for breakfast. She checked her food bag and found an empty oatmeal packet, but had no memory of preparing it. Minor detail, easily explained by exhaustion. Sarah consulted her maps and found a route back to the main trail. She marked the location of the strange tree on her GPS, planning to report it to the Trail Association. Maybe it was a historical landmark she'd missed on previous trips. The hike back to the long trail took an hour. When she reached the familiar white blazes, relief flooded through her. She checked her position and realized she'd somehow lost 3 miles. Her GPS showed her much further south than she should be. The device must have glitched during her detour. That night at a shelter, she met 2 other hikers, a couple from Massachusetts named Tom and Jennifer. They were through hiking the long trail, attempting the full 272 miles. Sarah mentioned her wrong turn and the unusual tree. Tom looked interested. Big sugar maple with weird markings on the bark? We saw that yesterday. Or wait, maybe the day before. He glanced at Jennifer, who frowned. I don't remember a tree like that, Jennifer said. You were there. You took a photo of it. Tom pulled out his phone and scrolled through his pictures. His frown deepened. That's weird. I remember taking pictures, but I don't see them. The conversation moved on to trail conditions and weather forecasts. But Sarah noticed Tom kept checking his phone, looking increasingly puzzled. Finally, he said, Jen, what day is it? April 14th, Saturday. We started the trail on April 9th. That was a Monday, so this should be Friday the 14th. Today is Saturday. They looked at each other with the dawning confusion of people realizing their memories don't align. Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest. She checked her own trail journal, where she meticulously recorded each day's mileage and campsite. The entries were there in her handwriting, but she couldn't remember writing them. April 12th and 13th were documented, complete with notes about terrain and weather, but the memories felt distant, like stories someone had told her rather than experiences she'd lived. She asked Tom and Jennifer where they'd camped on the 12th and 13th. They had to check their journals, neither able to remember clearly. Their entries were sparse, lacking the detail from earlier days. Maybe we're just tired, Jennifer suggested, but her voice carried doubt. Sarah lay awake in her sleeping bag that night, trying to remember the past 3 days. She could recall arriving at the trailhead on the 11th. She had a clear memory of that morning, loading her pack, checking her gear, then a gap. Then touching the tree, then everything after the tree felt immediate and real. The next morning she hiked out alone, pushing hard to reach the town of Manchester Center. She needed Wi-Fi, needed to check her credit card statements and phone records, needed some objective evidence of what she'd done in those missing days. At a coffee shop, she logged into her accounts. Her credit card showed purchases on the 12th and 13th, a gas station charge in Rutland on the 12th, a grocery store charge on the 13th in the same town. But Sarah had been on the trail. She hadn't been near Rutland. She hadn't driven anywhere. Her car was parked at the northern trailhead where she'd left it on the 11th. Unless she'd left the trail, driven to Rutland, and returned. But why? And why couldn't she remember? Her phone record showed calls she hadn't made. 3 calls to her lawyer on the 12th, totaling 47 minutes, a call to her sister on the 13th. Sarah called her sister immediately. Hey Sarah, you doing okay out there in the woods? Did I call you yesterday? Yeah, we talked for like 20 minutes. You were in your car taking a break from hiking. You said you decided to come home, that you were going to accept David's settlement offer. Sarah's hands went numb. What exactly did I say? Her sister recounted the conversation in detail. Sarah had apparently driven off the trail, checked into a motel in Rutland, and spent 2 days thinking things through. She decided the divorce fight wasn't worth the emotional cost. She was going to let David keep the house and take the financial settlement. Her sister had been relieved, saying it was the most at peace Sarah had sounded in months. None of it had happened. Or rather, Sarah had no memory of any of it happening. She drove to the motel in Rutland her sister mentioned. The clerk confirmed that a Sarah Whitmore had stayed there on the nights of the 12th and 13th. Paid cash. The security camera footage showed Sarah checking in, leaving, returning, checking out. She watched herself moving through the frame, expression calm, movements purposeful. A version of herself she didn't recognize. Sarah returned to the trail the next day, this time with a different purpose. She used her GPS to navigate back to the massive tree. It took hours of bushwhacking through dense forest, but she found it. The sugar maple stood exactly where her waypoint indicated, trunk marked with those strange deep gouges. She didn't touch it this time. She circled it slowly, examining the markings. They weren't random damage. The patterns were too regular, too deliberate. They looked almost like tally marks, hundreds of them carved over many years. Sarah pulled out her phone and photographed the tree from every angle. She documented the surrounding area, the specific trail conditions, everything. Then she hiked back to the main trail and continued north, checking her GPS constantly. That night, she reviewed the photos. They showed the forest, the trail, the surrounding trees. But the space where the massive sugar maple should be was empty. Just forest floor and smaller growth. She'd photographed the exact GPS coordinates, but the tree didn't appear in any image. The next morning, Sarah drove back to the trailhead where her car was parked. She packed up her gear, started the engine, and checked her phone. April 17th. She'd been on the trail for 6 days. Her journal documented all 6, but she could only remember 4. At home, she called her lawyer and confirmed what her sister had told her. Sarah had indeed called on the 12th and agreed to the settlement terms. Her lawyer had the notes, had already begun the paperwork. Sarah's own voice on the recording sounded calm, rational, decided. She listened to herself agreeing to terms she'd been fighting for months, making concessions she'd sworn she'd never make. She had no memory of the call. Over the following weeks, Sarah tried to find information about the tree. She contacted the Green Mountain Club, the Vermont Trail Association, local historians. No one knew of a significant sugar maple in that location. The coordinates she provided were on the long trail itself, a well-traveled section with no notable landmarks. She returned to Vermont in May with a friend, an experienced hiker named Patricia who'd worked as a wilderness guide for 20 years. They hiked to the GPS coordinates together. The tree was there. Patricia saw it too, confirmed its size and the unusual bark markings. She touched it. Sarah screamed for her to stop, but it was too late. Patricia's hand had already made contact with the trunk. Her friend stood there for a moment, looking confused, then stepped back. "That's weird," Patricia said. "What were we looking for?" "The tree. This tree, you just touched it." Patricia looked at the massive maple as if seeing it for the first time. "Oh wow, that's huge. Should we take some pictures?" Sarah grabbed her friend's arm and pulled her away from the tree. They hiked back to the trailhead quickly. In the car, Sarah asked Patricia what day it was. "May 23rd, Wednesday." "What did we do yesterday?" Patricia had to check her phone calendar. "Yesterday was Tuesday the 22nd. I worked until 5, then we drove up here. We stayed at that motel in Rutland." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "We drove straight through yesterday. We didn't stay anywhere. We arrived late and slept in the car at the trailhead." They checked Patricia's credit card. A motel charge in Rutland for the night of the 22nd. Patricia's phone photos showed her in a motel room Sarah didn't recognize. Timestamps on the images. May 22nd, 8:34 p.m. Sarah drove them directly to the motel. The clerk confirmed they'd checked in the previous night, stayed one night, checked out that morning. The security footage showed both of them. Sarah watched herself and Patricia walking through the lobby, talking, laughing. 20 hours she couldn't remember. Patricia was shaking. What's happening? Sarah had a theory, but it sounded insane. The tree took time. Not future time, but present time. When you touched it, you lost hours or days, continuing to exist and function, but without forming memories. A walking blackout that lasted until the tree decided to release you. And during that time, you made decisions, had conversations, lived a life you'd never remember. She contacted a folklore professor at the University of Vermont. After much persistence, he agreed to review her documentation. He listened to her story with increasing interest, then pulled out a leather-bound journal from his archives. It contained oral histories collected in the 1800s from Long Trail area settlers. There was a story about a tree, the forgetting tree they'd called it. Native American legends spoke of it too, describing it as a place where time became confused. People would touch it and lose days of their lives only to discover they'd done things they couldn't remember. Made journeys, spoken words, even signed documents in those missing hours. The professor showed Sarah drawings from the journal. The markings on the bark were identical to what she'd photographed. Each mark, according to the legend, represented a stolen day. Someone had been keeping count. Sarah never hiked the Long Trail again. She still goes to Vermont but stays in towns, keeps to roads, never ventures into the forest. Her divorce was finalized with the settlement she agreed to in her missing days. She tried to fight it, but her recorded voice on her lawyer's phone, her clear and rational decision-making, were legally binding. Sometimes she wonders what else she did in those lost hours. What conversations she had, what decisions she made, what version of herself existed without her consciousness directing it. A self that might have been calmer, more reasonable, unburdened by the emotional weight of memory. Patricia moved to Arizona 3 months later. She won't discuss what happened. But she told Sarah before she left that she'd found a dozen other missing days in her life when she checked carefully. Days where her credit cards showed purchases she didn't remember, where her phone records showed calls she hadn't made, where people remembered conversations with a version of her she'd never been. The tree is still there. Sarah checks her GPS coordinates periodically, and it always shows on the satellite imagery as dense forest. But she knows it's there, waiting for the next hiker to take a wrong turn, to lean against that massive trunk for just a moment, to trade present consciousness for a future they'll never remember choosing. Story 3. The Summit Count. Nobody hikes Mount Washington in January. The weather is brutal, the avalanche danger extreme, the temperatures often dropping below zero even before wind chill. But Vincent Ortega wasn't a casual hiker. He was a mountaineer who'd summited peaks in the Himalayas, who'd trained in alpine conditions for 15 years. He'd been planning this winter ascent for months, waiting for the right weather window. The forecast showed a brief high-pressure system moving through on January 12th. Clear skies, relatively moderate winds below 50 miles per hour at the summit. Vincent drove up from Boston on the 11th, checked his gear 3 times, and started up the Tuckerman Ravine Trail at dawn. The trail was hard-packed snow and ice. Vincent wore crampons and carried an ice axe, his pack loaded with winter camping gear in case he needed to bivvy. The forest section was quiet, the only sound his own breathing and the crunch of his crampons. He'd filed his itinerary with the ranger station. Solo winter ascent, experienced climber, expected summit time around 2 p.m., back to trailhead by dark. At treeline, the wind picked up. Vincent pulled on his mountaineering goggles and face mask, checked his GPS, and continued upward. The landscape became alien, all white and gray, rocks encased in rime ice. beautiful and deadly. That's when he saw them. A line of hikers descending from the summit, 7 people spaced evenly apart, moving in single file down the trail. Vincent stepped aside to let them pass, nodding a greeting to the first hiker. The man didn't acknowledge him. Neither did the second hiker or the third. All 7 passed without making eye contact, their faces visible through clear goggles, expressions blank. They wore matching red parkas, though the styles looked odd. Dated somehow, Vincent watched them descend until they disappeared into the cloud layer below. Strange that anyone else would be up here in January. Stranger still that they'd ignored trail courtesy. But some people were antisocial. Vincent continued upward. The summit was closer now, the ancient weather station visible through breaks in the cloud. Vincent checked his GPS, 1:47 p.m. Ahead of schedule. He pushed toward the final approach, the wind screaming around him, and encountered another group of descending hikers. 7 people, red parkas. Same blank expressions. They passed without acknowledgement, moving in perfect single file. Vincent stopped hiking. He pulled out his radio and called the ranger station. No response. The summit weather station should have been monitoring emergency frequencies, but he got only static. He tried his phone. No signal, which was expected. He was less than a quarter mile from the summit when he saw the third group. 7 hikers in red parkas descending in single file, faces visible but eyes focused on nothing. They walked past him like he didn't exist. Vincent turned around and started descending. Something was deeply wrong. 21 people in matching gear, all hiking in January conditions that should have kept everyone off the mountain, all ignoring him completely. As he dropped below tree line, he encountered another group. 7 hikers ascending this time. Red parkas, blank faces. They climbed past him without pause, heading toward the summit. Vincent's heart was pounding harder than the exertion warranted. He tried his radio again. Static. He checked his GPS. The device showed his position, but also something else. 7 dots above him on the mountain, 7 dots below him, 7 dots climbing up behind him. He wasn't seeing ghosts or hallucinating from altitude. His GPS was tracking them as real, physical presences. Vincent moved faster, nearly jogging down the icy trail. His crampons slipped twice, forcing him to slow down. He couldn't afford an injury up here. But the need to get off the mountain was overwhelming. Another group passed him going up, another going down. He started counting. 7 in each group, always 7. Red parkas, always red. No variation. At the Hermit Lake shelters, Vincent took refuge and checked his gear. Everything was functioning normally. His GPS showed his position accurately. His compass worked. His watch showed the correct time. But the GPS tracking showed dozens of red dots on the mountain now, all moving in patterns, ascending and descending, never stopping. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe a climbing club doing some kind of training exercise. But no club would put dozens of people on Mount Washington in January. The mountain killed experienced climbers in winter. This wasn't training. This was suicide. Vincent waited at the shelter for 30 minutes, hoping to see another hiker he could talk to. Someone normal. No one came. The GPS continued showing the red dots moving in their patterns, but none approached the shelter. He left the shelter and continued down. Every 15 minutes he encountered another group of 7. Going up or going down. Always the same red parkas, always the same blank expressions. He tried to speak to them, calling out greetings, asking if they needed help. None responded. They walked past like he was invisible. By the time Vincent reached his car at the Pinkham Notch Visitor Center, it was nearly dark. He'd passed 14 groups. 98 hikers in identical red parkas, all moving like automatons. Inside the visitor center, a ranger was shutting down for the night. Vincent approached, his voice shaking as he described what he'd seen. The ranger listened carefully, then pulled out a logbook. You were the only person who filed an itinerary for Washington today. You're the only person who should have been on that mountain. But my GPS tracked them, dozens of people. Can I see? Vincent pulled out his GPS device. The red dots were gone. The tracking history showed only his own route, no other hikers. He scrolled back through the data. Nothing. Just his solitary track up and down the mountain. The ranger was kind but firm. High altitude, cold stress, and isolation could cause hallucinations. It happened more often than people admitted. The brain created patterns, populated empty spaces with phantom people. Vincent should get warm, get food, rest. He'd be fine. But Vincent knew what he'd seen. Back at his hotel, he searched online for Mount Washington January hikers, red parkas, group accidents. He found it buried in old newspaper archives. January 12, 1982, exactly 41 years ago to the day. A group from the Appalachian Mountain Club, 49 people, attempted a winter training climb. Weather conditions deteriorated rapidly. The group split up trying to descend. 7 people took the Tuckerman Ravine Trail. 7 took the Lionhead route. 7 took the Boot Spur Trail. 7 more took other routes off the mountain. Only 14 made it down alive. 35 died on the mountain that day, the worst climbing disaster in Mount Washington history. The bodies weren't all recovered until spring. The survivors described the confusion, the way groups separated and lost track of each other, everyone wearing the same red club parkas, impossible to tell who was who in the whiteout conditions. Vincent did the math. 35 dead climbers, divided into groups of 7, 5 groups, but he'd encountered 14 groups, 98 hikers. He searched deeper and found more incidents. January 1968, 6 climbers died on Washington in matching club gear. January 1954, 8 climbers lost. January 1943, 12 climbers never came down. The mountain had a history of claiming climbers in January, often from organized groups, often people wearing matching equipment. Vincent returned to the visitor center the next morning and asked about the 1982 disaster. The ranger, different from the one he'd spoken to the previous night, pulled out memorial records. The club still held a remembrance ceremony every year on January 12th. But they didn't hike the mountain. Too dangerous, too haunted by memory. People report seeing them sometimes, the ranger admitted quietly. Always in January. Always on the anniversary, usually just 1 or 2 figures in. Red parkas. You're the first person who's ever reported multiple groups. Why groups of 7? That's how they divided themselves when the storm hit. 7-person teams. They thought smaller groups would move faster. None of them made it down. Vincent asked if anyone had ever climbed Washington on January 12th in recent years. The ranger checked records. Vincent's name was the only one in the past decade. Most people avoided that specific date out of superstition or respect. But you didn't summit, the ranger noted, checking Vincent's GPS track that he'd saved to the system. No, I turned back. Good decision. The weather station recorded wind gusts over 80 miles per hour yesterday afternoon. Above 2 p.m., conditions became lethal. If you'd continued, you wouldn't have made it back down. Vincent felt cold spreading through his chest. He'd been on schedule to summit at 2 p.m. The moment conditions turned deadly, the same conditions that had killed those climbers in 1982. So the hikers I saw were probably trying to warn you, or they were showing you what happens when you don't turn back. Vincent never climbed Mount Washington again, not in winter, not on any anniversary date. But he started researching other mountains with histories of group disasters. Rainier, Denali, the Matterhorn, everyone had similar reports. On specific dates, hikers encountered groups of climbers who didn't interact, who moved in patterns, who appeared on tracking devices but left no physical evidence. He found a pattern in the reports. The phantom hikers appeared to people who were making dangerous decisions, who were pushing into lethal conditions, who were about to become part of the mountain's history themselves. They weren't ghosts exactly, more like echoes, warnings written in the mountain's memory. Vincent started a database collecting reports from climbers worldwide. The pattern held. The phantom groups appeared on anniversaries, always in conditions matching the original disasters. And everyone who reported seeing them and turned back survived. Those who ignored them or never saw them at all often didn't come home. He contacted the families of the 1982 Mount Washington victims. Some were willing to talk. One woman whose brother had died on the mountain told him something that made his blood freeze. "My brother called me from the summit that day, before the weather turned. He said they'd been seeing other groups of climbers all morning. Large groups in red parkas. They kept passing each other, but no one was talking. He thought it was strange. That was the last time I heard his voice." The climbers who died had seen themselves. They'd walked past their own echoes, not recognizing the warning, and climbed into the storm that would kill them. Vincent published his research in obscure mountaineering journals. Most people dismissed it as folklore or hallucination, but a few experienced climbers contacted him privately with their own stories. Sightings on K2, on Annapurna, on dozens of lesser-known peaks, always the same pattern. Repeated encounters with identical groups, always on anniversary dates of disasters. One climber sent him a GPS track from Mount Washington, January 12, 2019. The track showed what Vincent's had shown, dozens of red dots moving in patterns across the mountain, appearing and disappearing, hiking routes that ended in the places where bodies had been recovered in 1982. The mountain counts its dead, and on the anniversary of their deaths, it shows them to anyone foolish enough to follow. Vincent wonders how many people never saw the warning. How many climbed past the echoes without noticing, pushed toward summits in lethal conditions, and became new dots on the map. New groups of 7 in red parkas walking the mountain forever, trying to warn the next climber who won't listen. He checks the Mount Washington Summit registry online sometimes. Every January 12th, he searches for new names, and every year the date remains blank. Nobody summits Washington on January 12th anymore. The mountain has made its message clear. The only question is how many more echoes it needs before people stop trying. Story 4. The Backward Hiker. Jennifer Russo had been hiking the Pennsylvania section of the Appalachian Trail for 6 days when she encountered the backward hiker. The Delaware Water Gap section was notorious for its rocky terrain, and Jennifer's knees were already protesting the constant ups and downs. She was pushing through the afternoon, focused on reaching the next shelter before dark, when she heard footsteps behind her. She stepped aside to let the faster hiker pass, but no one came. The footsteps continued, steady and close, but when she turned around, the trail behind her was empty. She shrugged it off as acoustic tricks in the forest and kept moving. 10 minutes later, she heard the footsteps again. Closer this time. Jennifer stopped and turned quickly, hoping to catch whoever was following her. The trail was empty, no one in sight in either direction. Then she saw him, about 50 yards ahead, moving away from her. A man in hiking gear, backpack, trekking poles. But something was wrong with the way he moved. She watched for a moment before her brain processed what she was seeing. He was walking backward, not turning around to look where he'd been. Actually hiking backward, facing her, moving steadily down the trail in reverse. Jennifer called out, "Hey, are you okay?" The man didn't respond. He continued his backward walk, navigating rocks and roots without looking, never stumbling. His face was visible, a man in his 40s with several days of beard growth, but his expression was blank. eyes open but not focused on anything. She hurried to catch up with him, concerned he might be having some kind of medical episode. But the backward hiker maintained his pace perfectly, staying about 50 yards ahead no matter how fast Jennifer walked. When she jogged, he jogged backward. When she slowed, he slowed. This continued for over an hour. Jennifer tried multiple times to close the distance, even breaking into a run. But the gap remained constant. The backward hiker never looked where he was going, yet never missed a step. He navigated a narrow ridge section, a steep descent, and a boulder scramble, all while walking in reverse, all without apparent difficulty. As sunset approached, Jennifer gave up trying to reach him. She made camp at a small clearing near a stream, setting up her tent quickly. The backward hiker had disappeared around a bend in the trail. She heated dinner on her camp stove, trying to rationalize what she'd seen. Maybe it was a training technique. Maybe he had a camera mounted on his chest and was filming his backward hike for social media. Weird, but not impossible. She was zipping up her tent when she heard the footsteps again. Not behind her this time, ahead, coming from the direction she'd been traveling. She emerged from her tent and saw him. The backward hiker was returning, still moving in reverse. But now he was walking back the way he'd come, which meant he was approaching her while facing forward, moving backward. It was disorienting to watch. He walked straight past her campsite less than 10 feet away, but didn't acknowledge her presence. His eyes were open but vacant, like a sleepwalker. Jennifer called out, "Do you need help?" No response. He continued past her, backing up the trail, disappearing into the darkness. She listened to his footsteps fade. They were coming from ahead of her now, even though he just walked past, going the opposite direction. She crawled into her tent and tried to sleep, but the sound of footsteps continued all night. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes seeming to circle her campsite. She kept her headlamp on, pointing it toward the tent door, but never saw anyone pass. At dawn, exhausted and unnerved, Jennifer packed up quickly and started hiking. She wanted to reach the next town, get off the trail for a day, maybe talk to some locals about what she'd seen. The trail descended toward a road crossing where she could hitchhike to a nearby town. But as she hiked, she began to notice something disturbing. The trail looked wrong, not drastically different, but slightly off. Blazes seemed to be in odd positions. Landmarks she'd passed yesterday appeared again, but reversed somehow. A distinctive lightning-struck tree that should have been on her right was on her left. A creek crossing she'd forded upstream yesterday now seemed to be downstream. Jennifer checked her GPS. According to the device, she was moving north, making progress toward her destination. But the trail felt like it was going backward, like she was retracing her steps even though her GPS insisted she was moving forward. Then she saw her own tent. The clearing where she'd camped last night appeared ahead of her. Same position, same trees, same stream. But that was impossible. She'd been hiking away from it for 2 hours. Jennifer checked her GPS again. It showed her position as 5 miles north of her campsite, but she was standing in her campsite. The cold ashes of her morning fire were right there. She walked over and touched them, still warm. Panic rising, she started hiking faster. The trail began to feel like a loop, the same sections appearing over and over. That lightning-struck tree again. The same boulder field. The same narrow ridge. Her GPS continued showing northward progress, ticking off miles, but the landscape repeated. She encountered the backward hiker in the afternoon. He was ahead of her again, walking in reverse, maintaining that 50-yard distance. But now Jennifer noticed something she'd missed before. His pack was on backward. His trekking poles were extended behind him rather than in front. His boots were on the wrong feet. Everything about him was reversed. and he was navigating the trail perfectly, moving through terrain he couldn't see, never stumbling, never hesitating. Jennifer tried a different approach. She stopped hiking and sat down on the trail. If the backward hiker maintained his distance, maybe he'd stop too. She waited. He kept walking backward, kept approaching. Jennifer stood up and backed away, maintaining the gap. The hiker continued his reverse progress down the trail, now walking toward her while facing away. She was forced to hike backward herself to keep the distance. That's when she understood. The trail wasn't looping. She was. Every step forward took her backward. Every mile gained on her GPS was a mile retraced. She'd been hiking in reverse since encountering the backward hiker, and the landscape reflecting it showed her the truth. She turned around and started hiking south, back toward where she'd started this section. If forward was backward, maybe backward would take her forward. The landscape immediately started looking correct. The lightning-struck tree was on the right side again. The creek crossing was upstream. Her GPS, however, now showed her moving south, away from her destination. The backward hiker was behind her now, still walking in reverse. But from Jennifer's new perspective, he was hiking forward. They were moving in the same direction for the first time. She could see his face as he approached from behind, walking backward toward her. Jennifer maintained her southern course, ignoring her GPS. She hiked for hours, retracing her steps from the past week. Every landmark appeared in the correct order, but reversed from how she'd initially encountered them. She was hiking backward through her own journey, undoing her progress. At sunset, she reached the shelter where she'd stayed 6 nights ago. The backward hiker arrived moments later, still moving in reverse. He climbed the shelter, steps backward, entered through the door backward, and sat on a bunk facing the wall. Jennifer sat opposite him. "What happened to you?" For the first time, the man's eyes focused. He looked at her with an expression of profound sadness and spoke. His voice was wrong, like a recording played in reverse, but she could understand it if she focused. "I tried to finish. Everyone said south to north, Maine to Georgia. I went north to south, wrong direction. The trail doesn't allow it. I'm going north to south too. I'm section hiking. You're going forward now. You turned around. You're not fighting the trail anymore. But I want to go north. That's where I parked my car." The backward hiker shook his head. His movements were reversed, so the headshake looked like a nod. "The trail has a direction. It was walked first south to north. Every hiker since walks the same way. The path remembers. If you go wrong, it turns you around." "That's insane. The trail is 2,000 miles of intention, millions of footsteps, all going the same direction. That much walking creates a current. You can't swim against it." Jennifer pulled out her phone. No signal as expected, but she had offline maps. She showed the backward hiker her planned route. "I'm section hiking Pennsylvania south to north over 2 weeks. That's my plan. You'll never finish. Every step north takes you south. You'll hike in place until you give up or turn around. I've been walking backward for 3 years." "3 years?" "I started in 2020, Catadine to Springer, wrong direction. The trail reversed me on day 2. I've been trying to correct it ever since. Can't go forward, can't go back. Stuck in reversal." Jennifer's hands were shaking. "So what do I do?" "Hike south. Finish your section that way. Then start at the northern end and hike south again. The trail allows you to repeat sections. It doesn't allow you to walk against the current. But my car is north of here. Then walk south until you can exit, go around, start again from the north. Don't fight the direction." Jennifer didn't sleep that night. She lay in her sleeping bag, listening to the backward hiker move around the shelter in reverse. At dawn, she made a decision. She packed her gear and started hiking south. The trail immediately felt right. The landscape stopped repeating. Her GPS showed southward movement, and the terrain matched. She hiked for 3 days, covering the sections she'd already done, and reached a road crossing where she could hitchhike to a town. She got a ride from a local who knew the trail well. Jennifer asked him about hikers going the wrong direction. "Oh yeah, that happens sometimes. Folks who don't know better start from Springer and try to go north to south through here. Most of them quit after a few days. Say they keep getting turned around, can't make progress. Trail's got a current to it. You don't fight a current. Has anyone ever succeeded going north to south? Not through Pennsylvania. Maybe other sections, I don't know. But this section, the old-timers say it was walked first by Native Americans going south to north following game trails. Been that way for thousands of years. The land remembers. Jennifer rented a car and drove around to the northern end of the Pennsylvania section. She started hiking south, covering ground she'd already walked backward. This time, everything worked. Her GPS matched the terrain. The landmarks appeared in logical order. She completed the section in 8 days. She never saw the backward hiker again during that trip. But at the final shelter before the southern terminus, she found a logbook. Hundreds of hikers had signed it over the years. She flipped back through the entries and found one from 2020. Starting my through hike north to south. Can't wait to prove everyone wrong about the direction. Daniel Cross. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Below it, written in the same hand but barely readable, were dozens of entries. Same name, same date, repeated over and over. January 15th, 2020. January 15th, 2020. January 15th, 2020. Over 40 entries, all the same date, filling pages of the logbook. The final entry from Daniel Cross was dated yesterday. Jennifer's hands went numb as she read it. Still walking backward, day 1287. If anyone finds this, don't hike north to south, don't fight the current. You'll end up like me, trapped in reversal, hiking the same day forever. The trail doesn't forgive wrong direction. Jennifer tore out the pages and took them with her. She reported the backward hiker to the Trail Association, giving them Daniel Cross's name and description. They searched for 3 weeks but found no one. No missing person report matched the name. No hiker registration. It was like he'd never existed. But Jennifer knows he's still out there, still hiking backward through Pennsylvania, stuck in a loop of his own creation, trapped by walking against the current. She doesn't section hike anymore, and when she advises new hikers, she always tells them the same thing. The trail has a direction. Follow it. Don't fight it. Because if you walk against the current long enough, eventually you become the current flowing backward through time, erasing yourself with every reversed step. Story 5. The Elevation Theft. Thomas Brennan had been training for the Presidential Traverse for 6 months, 23 miles covering 7 summits in New Hampshire's White Mountains, including Mount Washington. He was in the best shape of his life at 42, running marathons, doing weekend training hikes with a weighted pack. He'd picked August 15th for the attempt, studying weather patterns, ensuring he'd have clear conditions. The traverse started at the Appalachia Trailhead at 1,280 feet elevation. Thomas began hiking at 5 in the morning, headlamp cutting through pre-dawn darkness. The trail climbed steeply toward Mount Madison, the first summit at 5,366 feet. Thomas settled into his rhythm, breathing steady, legs strong. He'd gain over 9,000 feet of elevation over the course of the day. His GPS tracked every foot. He reached Madison's summit at 9:47 a.m., exactly on his planned schedule. The views were spectacular, the entire presidential range spread out before him. He took a few photos, ate an energy bar, and started toward Mount Adams. The descent from Madison was steep but manageable. Thomas's GPS showed him dropping elevation rapidly. 5,200 feet, 5,000 feet, 4,800 feet. Then the trail began climbing toward Adams. Thomas pushed upward, watching his altimeter tick higher. 4,900 feet, 5,100 feet, 5,300 feet. But something felt wrong. His legs were more tired than they should be. The climb felt harder than his training had prepared him for. He checked his heart rate monitor. Elevated, pushing into Zone 4 when he should still be in Zone 3. He slowed his pace, focusing on breathing. The summit of Mount Adams should have been at 5,793 feet. Thomas's GPS showed him reaching 5,793 feet. But when he looked at the summit marker, it read 5,266 feet, the exact elevation of Mount Madison, the summit he'd just left. Thomas checked his GPS again. The device insisted he was at 5,793 feet. But the physical marker, the official USGS benchmark, showed 5,366. He took a photo of the discrepancy, trying to understand. GPS errors were common in mountains, but this was too precise to be random. The device was showing the correct elevation for Adams, but the physical world was showing Madison's elevation. He continued to Mount Jefferson. The climb should have taken him to 5,716 feet. His GPS tracked the gain, showing him ascending. But his legs felt like he was climbing much higher, like the mountain was twice as tall as it should be. When he reached Jefferson's summit, the marker read 5,266 feet. Again, Madison's elevation. Thomas sat down, breathing hard. Something was fundamentally wrong. His GPS showed 3 different summit elevations. Mount Madison at 5,366 feet, Mount Adams at 5,793 feet, Mount Jefferson at 5,716 feet, but every physical summit marker showed the same elevation, 5,366 feet. He was gaining elevation. His altimeter confirmed it. His lungs felt it. The increasing difficulty of breathing, the way his legs burned, the pressure change in his ears, all indicated he was going higher. But the mountains were refusing to acknowledge it. Thomas pulled out his planned route profile. The traverse was supposed to cover 9,000 feet of elevation gain and 8,500 feet of elevation loss over 23 miles. Every summit was a different height, the profile a jagged line of ups and downs. But if every summit was actually at 5,366 feet, then he wasn't traversing. He was climbing the same mountain over and over. He checked his position on the GPS. The map showed him on Mount Jefferson's summit. The trail ahead led down to Edmonds Cole, then up to Mount Clay and Mount Washington. But when Thomas looked ahead, the trail seemed to descend and then climb to a summit that looked identical to the one he was sitting on. Same rocky peak, same cairn structure, same vegetation patterns. Thomas started the descent to Edmonds Cole. His GPS showed him dropping elevation. 5,600 feet, 5,400 feet, 5,200 feet. But his legs felt like he was staying level, like he was walking on flat ground. The trail was physically descending, rocks and roots forcing him to watch his footing, but his body wasn't experiencing the elevation loss. At Edmonds Cole, his GPS showed 4,938 feet. His legs felt like he was at 5,366 feet. The base of Mount Clay rose ahead of him. According to his GPS, it should be a 772-foot climb to Clay's summit at 5,710 feet, but looking at the mountain, it appeared identical in size to Madison, Adams, and Jefferson. Thomas started climbing. His heart rate spiked immediately, pushing into Zone 5. His breathing became labored. His legs burned like he was climbing at high altitude, not the moderate elevation of the White Mountains. He'd climbed Colorado 14ers with less difficulty than this. Halfway up Clay, Thomas had to stop. His vision was tunneling, his heart pounding in his ears. He checked his pulse manually. 178 beats per minute, way too high for his fitness level at this pace. He sat down, forced himself to breathe slowly, and looked at his GPS. The device showed him at 5,366 feet, but he'd started the climb from 4,238 feet and had only climbed for 15 minutes. There was no way he'd gained 428 feet in that time at his current pace. The GPS had skipped forward or the mountain had compressed. He continued climbing, moving slowly now. Every step felt like he was gaining more elevation than the terrain suggested. His body was experiencing altitude that didn't match the physical landscape. By the time he reached Clay's summit, he was lightheaded and nauseous. Altitude sickness symptoms at 5,366 feet, an elevation that should cause no issues. The summit marker confirmed it, 5,366 feet, 4 summits, 4 identical elevations. Thomas pulled out his emergency beacon. He was experiencing some kind of medical crisis. Altitude sickness at moderate elevation didn't make sense, but his symptoms were real and worsening. He activated the beacon and sat down to wait for rescue. But after 30 minutes, no one came. His beacon showed as active, transmitting his GPS coordinates, yet no helicopter, no ground rescue team. He tried his phone. No signal, which was expected in the mountains. His GPS continued tracking, showing his position clearly. Thomas made a decision. He'd descend to the Appalachian Mountain Club's Lakes of the Clouds hut just below Mount Washington. The hut had radio communication. They could coordinate rescue if he needed it. The trail down from Clay was supposed to be short, less than a mile to the hut. Thomas started descending. His GPS showed him dropping elevation rapidly, but his body felt like he was climbing. His legs shook from exertion. His breathing remained labored. The trail physically went downward, but physiologically he was ascending. It took him 2 hours to reach the hut, a distance he should have covered in 30 minutes. When he arrived, gasping and dizzy, the hut crew stared at him in confusion. "Are you okay? You look like you just summited Washington," one of them said. "I'm at the hut. I'm below the summit. Why do I feel like I'm at altitude?" The hut crew member checked Thomas's pulse, looked at his fingernails for signs of hypoxia, assessed his symptoms. "You're showing signs of moderate altitude sickness, but we're at 5,012 feet. That shouldn't cause these symptoms." Thomas showed them his GPS tracking. 4 summits, all showing different elevations on the device, but his physical experience suggested he'd climbed much higher. The hut crew exchanged glances. One of them, an older man named Richard who'd worked huts for 20 years, pulled Thomas aside. "How much elevation gain does your GPS show?" Thomas checked the day's total. 7,047 feet of gain. He'd covered 4 summits and multiple cols. The number seemed right. "And how do you feel?" "Like I've climbed 15,000 feet, like I'm on a serious alpine peak." Richard nodded slowly. "It happens sometimes. Usually to people pushing too hard, trying to do the traverse too fast. The mountains take more than you give. You climb 1,000 feet, but they take 2,000. Your body feels the difference. That's not possible. You're experiencing it right now. Your GPS shows one number, your body shows another. Which one is lying?" Thomas had no answer. Richard explained that the White Mountains had a reputation among experienced climbers. The elevations were moderate by alpine standards, but the difficulty was disproportionate. People died on these mountains in weather conditions that would be manageable elsewhere. The elevation gain seemed reasonable on paper, but destroyed even fit hikers. "It's like the mountains are higher than they claim to be," Richard said. "The trails gain more elevation than the summits show. Every step up costs more than it should. We call it elevation theft. The mountains take what they want, regardless of what the maps say." Thomas spent the night at the hut. His symptoms gradually improved, though his legs felt like he'd climbed a major peak. The next morning, Richard offered to hike out with him, descending the Ammonoosuc Ravage Trail to the western trailhead. The descent should have been 2,500 feet of elevation loss over 3 miles. Thomas's GPS tracked it precisely, but his legs felt like he was descending twice that. Every step jarred his knees like he was coming down from serious altitude. By the time they reached the parking lot, Thomas could barely walk. Richard helped him to his car. "You tried to steal from the mountains, take the traverse, take the summits, take the experience. They stole back, took elevation from your legs, from your lungs, from your body. You'll feel it for weeks." Thomas drove home in a daze. Over the following days, he checked his GPS tracks obsessively. The data was clear. 4 summits, correct elevations, proper gain and loss. But his body told a different story. His legs ached like he'd climbed Rainier. His lungs felt strained like he'd been at altitude for days. His resting heart rate stayed elevated for 2 weeks. He found online forums discussing similar experiences. Dozens of hikers reported the same phenomenon on the Presidential Traverse. GPS data showing moderate elevation gain, bodies experiencing something far more extreme. Some people theorized that the White Mountains existed at multiple elevations simultaneously, that the physical summits were at 5,000 feet, but the experiential summits were at 15,000. One post stood out. A search and rescue worker who'd retrieved bodies from Mount Washington for 15 years. He wrote that many victims died showing signs of extreme altitude sickness, pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, conditions that shouldn't occur below 6,000 feet. Autopsies showed their lungs and brains looked like they died at 20,000 feet. But the bodies were found at 5,000. Thomas never attempted the Presidential Traverse again. He sold his mountaineering gear and switched to flat trail running. But sometimes, on clear days, he drives past the White Mountains and looks up at the peaks. They're only 5,000 feet tall according to every map and survey. But he knows the truth. Those mountains are as high as they want to be, and they take elevation from anyone arrogant enough to think they can measure them. His GPS still shows that day's track. 4 summits, all at their correct elevations. But Thomas's body carries a different record. Micro damage in his leg muscles consistent with extreme altitude climbing. Slight permanent reduction in his lung capacity. Cardiovascular changes that his doctor can't explain for someone who supposedly never climbed above 6,000 feet. The mountains took their toll. They stole elevation from his future, added it to his past, and left him with a body that climbed peaks that don't exist on any map. Story 6. The Trail Ahead. Monica Vasquez started the 100-mile wilderness in northern Maine on September 2nd. The final section of the Appalachian Trail before Mount Katahdin, it was the most remote stretch of the entire 2,190-mile trail. No road crossings, no towns, no easy exits for 11 days of hiking. She'd been planning this through hike for 2 years and was excited to finally attempt the legendary section. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, comfortable temperatures, the forest thick and wild. Monica's pack felt good, her pace steady. She'd covered 8 miles by mid-afternoon and stopped for a break at a stream crossing. As she filtered water, she noticed another hiker approaching from the south. A woman in her 30s, blonde hair and a braid, expensive gear that looked brand new. She smiled as she approached. "Hey, how's the trail ahead?" Monica turned to look north, the direction she'd just come from. "Oh, I'm heading south. Haven't been that way yet." The woman's smile didn't waver. "Right. How's the trail ahead?" "I just said I haven't been that way. I'm southbound." "The trail ahead," the woman repeated, still smiling. "Is it clear?" Monica felt a prickle of unease. "I'm going south. You're going north. Ahead for me is behind for you." "I haven't hiked it yet." The woman nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Thanks." She continued past Monica, heading north, and disappeared around a bend. Monica stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the strange interaction. Some people were weird on the trail. Social skills deteriorated after weeks in the wilderness. She finished filtering her water and continued south. 20 minutes later, she encountered the woman again. Same blonde braid, same expensive gear, walking north. The woman smiled. "Hey, how's the trail ahead?" Monica stopped. "We just talked at the stream." "Is the trail clear ahead?" "We literally just had this conversation." The woman walked past without responding, heading north again. Monica watched her go, her unease growing into genuine discomfort. She checked her map. The trail didn't loop here. There was no way the woman could have circled around and approached from the south again. Unless she'd turned around and passed Monica somehow, but Monica hadn't stopped or left the trail. Monica hiked faster, wanting to put distance between herself and the strange hiker. The forest felt darker suddenly, the trees closing in. She covered another 2 miles and stopped at a tent site to rest. As she sat on a log, she heard footsteps. The blonde woman appeared, walking north. "Hey, how's the trail ahead?" Monica stood up. "What's going on? Why do you keep asking me that? Is it clear?" "Stop asking me about the trail ahead. I haven't been that direction." The woman smiled and continued past, heading north. Monica counted to 10, trying to calm herself. This was insane. She pulled out her GPS and marked her current position. If the woman appeared again, Monica would confront her, demand to know what was happening. She waited 30 minutes. No one appeared. Monica packed up and started hiking again. The trail wound through dense forest, crossing several small streams. Her GPS showed steady progress south. She'd covered 15 miles on her first day, a solid start. At her planned campsite for the night, Monica set up her tent and hung her food bag. As she ate dinner, she heard voices. 2 men appeared, hiking north. They looked exhausted, their gear dirty and worn. "How's the trail ahead?" one of them asked. Monica's blood went cold. "What did you say?" "Trail conditions north. Are they clear?" "I'm going south. I haven't been north." The men exchanged a glance. "You haven't hiked north at all?" "No. I just said that." The second man looked worried. "How long have you been on this section?" "Since this morning. This is my first day." "Have you seen other hikers asking about the trail ahead?" Monica's hands were shaking. A woman. 3 times. She kept asking the same question. The men sat down heavily. The first one said, "We've been in the 100-mile for 6 days. We keep encountering the same hikers over and over, different people, but they all ask about the trail ahead. And they always come from the direction we haven't been yet. That doesn't make sense." "We know. We've been trying to figure it out. Our GPS shows us making progress, but the encounters keep repeating. We'll hike 5 miles and meet someone coming from ahead. An hour later, we meet them again. Same person, same question, same direction." The second man pulled out his phone. "Look at our photos." He scrolled through dozens of images, different hikers, different locations, but always the same composition. People approaching on the trail asking questions. Timestamps showed the photos were taken over 6 days, but the faces repeated. The same blonde woman Monica had met, the same elderly couple, the same solo hiker with a red pack. "How many different people?" Monica asked. 12. We meet them in rotation. Every 12 hikers we encounter, the pattern repeats." Monica's mind raced. "So you're saying the trail is populated by the same 12 hikers and they just cycle through?" "We don't know what we're saying, but we're getting out. We're hiking out tonight, taking the logging road exit at the next opportunity, even if we have to bushwhack. This section is wrong." The men left within minutes, hiking by headlamp into the darkness. Monica sat by her tent, trying to decide what to do. She could join them, bail out on her first day, or she could continue, see if the pattern held, try to understand what was happening. She decided to continue. She'd come too far to quit on day 1 because of strange hiker encounters. Maybe the men had been in the wilderness too long, gotten paranoid and confused. Day 2 started normally. Monica hiked south, covering good mileage, feeling strong. Around noon, she encountered a hiker coming north, an elderly man with a white beard walking with trekking poles. "How's the trail ahead?" he asked. Monica felt her stomach drop. She'd seen this man in the photos on the men's phone, one of the 12. "Fine. Clear trail. Any water sources?" "I don't know. I haven't been that way." The man nodded and continued past. Monica forced herself to keep hiking. An hour later, she encountered him again. Same white beard, same trekking poles coming from the north. "How's the trail ahead?" Monica didn't answer. She walked past him, refusing to engage. Over the next 3 days, she encountered the same 12 hikers repeatedly. The blonde woman, the elderly man, a young couple, a solo hiker with a red pack. They cycled through in the same order, always coming from the north, always asking about the trail ahead. On day 5, Monica tried an experiment. When she encountered the blonde woman for the 7th time, Monica answered differently. "The trail ahead is blocked. Fallen trees, you can't get through." The woman smiled. "Thanks." She continued north. An hour later, Monica encountered her again. "How's the trail ahead?" "I just told you it's blocked." "Is it clear?" The woman had no memory of their previous conversation. Monica tried the same experiment with the elderly man, giving him detailed information about trail conditions. When he appeared again an hour later, he asked the same question as if they'd never met. The hikers weren't real. Or they were real once, but now they were echoes. Recordings playing on loop. Monica was hiking through a trail populated by ghosts who didn't know they were ghosts. She checked her GPS obsessively. The device showed her making progress south, covering miles each day. But the landscape began to feel repetitive. That distinctive boulder formation, that lightning-struck birch tree, that stream crossing with the beaver dam. She marked each on her GPS and realized she was encountering them multiple times, even though her position showed continuous southward movement. On day 7, Monica admitted the truth. She wasn't making progress. The GPS was lying, or the trail was looping, or space itself was folded. She'd been hiking for a week and hadn't left the same 10-mile stretch. The 100-mile wilderness was infinite. She tried to exit. She bushwhacked east, following her compass, hoping to reach a logging road. After 2 hours of brutal off-trail hiking, she emerged onto the Appalachian Trail. The same white blazes, the same path. She was back where she'd started. She tried going west. Same result. Every direction led back to the trail. That night, Monica encountered another hiker at a shelter. A man in his 50s, thin and exhausted. He was sitting with his head in his hands. "How long have you been here?" Monica asked. 16 days. I can't get out. The trail won't let me leave." "You've tried bushwhacking?" "Every direction. It always loops back. I'm running out of food. I've been rationing, but I've got maybe 2 days left." Monica shared her dinner with him. He told her he'd started the 100-mile wilderness on August 17th. A simple 11-day section hike. But on day 3, he'd started encountering the same hikers repeatedly. By day 5, he'd realized he was trapped. He'd tried everything. Following streams, using his compass, GPS navigation, even trying to hike at night to break the pattern. Nothing worked. The trail was a closed loop disguised as linear progress. "There's got to be a way out," Monica said. "The trail has to end. Other people finish the 100-mile. "Do they? Have you ever met anyone who's actually completed it? Or do you just trust the trail guides and journals?" Monica thought about it. She'd read dozens of accounts of people hiking the 100-mile wilderness, but she'd never personally met anyone who'd done it. She'd always assumed it was possible because the guides said it was possible. The man continued, "I think most people never even start this section. They skip it, or they think they've hiked it, but their memories are false. This section isn't real, it's a trap. The trail goes on forever and we're stuck in it." Over the following days, Monica's food ran low. She rationed carefully, supplementing with berries and cattail roots from streams. Her body grew thin. Her mind started to fracture. The same 12 hikers appeared in their rotation. "How's the trail ahead?" became a mantra, a meaningless question repeated by meaningless apparitions. On day 23, Monica encountered a hiker she'd never seen before. A young woman, maybe 19, with a fresh pack and clean clothes. She looked real, her eyes focused. She saw Monica. "Oh my God, are you okay?" the young woman asked. Monica grabbed her. "You're new, you just entered the 100-mile. "Yeah, started this morning, are you hurt?" "You have to leave, turn around, go back the way you came, don't hike south." The young woman backed away, clearly frightened. "I'm trying to reach Katahdin, this is the final section." "There is no final section, this part goes on forever. You'll hike until you run out of food and die, please turn around." The young woman pulled out her phone, trying to call for help. No signal. She looked at Monica with pity and fear. "I think you need medical attention. How long have you been out here?" 23 days, please listen to me." But the young woman backed away, then turned and started hiking south. Monica tried to follow, but her legs were too weak. She watched the young woman disappear around a bend. An hour later, Monica encountered her walking north. "How's the trail ahead?" the young woman asked, her eyes unfocused, her smile blank. Monica started crying. The trail had claimed another one. "She's still hiking the 100-mile wilderness. GPS shows she's covered over 400 miles, but she's still in the same section. The same 12 hikers appear in rotation. New hikers occasionally join, asking about the trail ahead, becoming part of the loop. Monica's body is skeletal now, sustained by something other than food. She can't remember what it's like to be hungry or tired. She just walks. If you plan to hike the 100-mile wilderness in northern Maine, watch for a thin woman with dark hair and hollow eyes. If she grabs you and begs you to turn around, listen to her. Don't ask about the trail ahead, because ahead is a lie. Ahead is behind is ahead. The trail is a circle, and once you enter, you'll hike it forever, asking the same questions, receiving the same answers, never reaching the end that was always just a few more miles away. Story 7. The Rest Step. Kevin Sullivan was a trail maintainer for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, assigned to a 20-mile section in Tennessee near Clingman's Dome. He'd been doing maintenance work for 8 years, hiking the same sections dozens of times, knowing every route and rock. The work was solitary, which suited him fine. He'd clear blowdowns, repair water bars, paint blazes, and ensure the trail remained passable for through hikers. On October 3rd, Kevin hiked in to repair a badly eroded section near Siler Bald. He carried a chainsaw, tools, and materials to build new water diversion structures. The work would take 2 days, requiring him to camp overnight. He'd done this specific repair 100 times on other trail sections. Around mile marker 8, Kevin noticed something odd, a set of boot prints in the mud, perfectly preserved. The prints were his size, the sole pattern matched his boots. But Kevin hadn't hiked this section in 3 weeks, and Tennessee had seen heavy rain 5 days ago. Fresh prints shouldn't match his boots unless someone else wore the same model and size. He continued hiking and found more prints. Always his boots, always his stride length, always his gait pattern. Kevin had been walking trails long enough to recognize his own tracks. These were his, but they couldn't be his. At the worksite, Kevin set down his pack and examined the eroded section. It was worse than the reports had indicated. The trail had washed out significantly, creating a gully 3 feet deep. He'd need to build several water bars and possibly reroute a small section. As he worked, he kept noticing movement in his peripheral vision. Quick flashes, like someone stepping behind a tree just as he turned his head. Kevin stopped several times, called out, checked the area. Nothing. The forest was empty. By late afternoon, he'd completed the first water bar and started on the second. Physical exhaustion was settling in. He'd been digging and carrying rocks for hours. Kevin decided to take a rest step. It was a mountaineering technique he'd learned years ago. Instead of stopping completely, you paused briefly with each step, locking your leg and resting your muscles for a moment before continuing. It allowed you to keep moving while recovering. Kevin took a rest step, pausing with his right leg locked. In that moment of stillness, he saw himself. About 20 feet ahead, another Kevin was taking a rest step. Same clothes, same pack, same posture. The other Kevin held the rest step for 3 seconds, then continued forward. Kevin blinked. The figure was gone. He shook his head, assuming exhaustion was causing hallucinations. He continued working, but his focus was shot. He kept seeing movement, kept catching glimpses of someone wearing his clothes. That evening, Kevin set up camp near the work site. He ate dinner as the sun set, watching the forest grow dark. His headlamp created a small bubble of light in the vast darkness. As he cleaned his cooking pot, he heard a sound, the distinctive clink of a pot being set down. Kevin turned off his headlamp and sat in darkness, listening. Another clink, the sound of someone moving through a campsite routine, unzipping a stuff sack, setting up a sleeping pad. The sounds came from about 30 feet away, deeper in the forest. Kevin turned on his headlamp and pointed it toward the sounds. Nothing, just forest. He listened again in darkness. The sounds continued. Someone was camping parallel to him, going through the exact same evening routine. He tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he shifted in his sleeping bag, he heard an identical sound from the other campsite. When he coughed, he heard a cough. When he rolled over, he heard the rustle of another sleeping bag. At dawn, Kevin packed up quickly and returned to work. He wanted to finish the repairs and get off this section. The isolation was getting to him. But as he worked on the third water bar, he kept seeing himself taking rest steps. Always ahead of him, always in the same position. Right leg locked, left leg bent, body paused mid-stride. Kevin stopped working and started hiking toward the figure. Every time he got close, it disappeared. He'd see it ahead, walk 20 feet and find nothing. Then catch another glimpse further up the trail. He realized he was following his own rest steps. Every time he'd paused while hiking, he'd left behind a frozen moment of himself. The trail was populated by his pauses, his rest steps manifesting as visible echoes. Kevin sat down on a rock, trying to process this. He'd taken thousands of rest steps on trails over the years. If each one left an echo, the Appalachian Trail would be crowded with frozen versions of him, paused mid-stride, scattered across hundreds of miles. He thought about all the hikers who used the rest step technique, mountaineers, through hikers, anyone who'd learned to pause briefly while climbing. How many frozen moments were out there, invisible most of the time, but occasionally glimpsed? Kevin decided to test his theory. He started hiking north, deliberately taking rest steps every 20 paces. Right leg locked, pause for 3 seconds, continue. He did this for half a mile, creating a line of pauses. Then he turned around and hiked back south. As he walked, he saw them, frozen versions of himself. Paused mid-stride, right leg locked, exactly where he'd taken rest steps 15 minutes earlier. They weren't quite solid, more like afterimages, but they were definitely visible. Kevin walked right up to one and examined it. The figure looked exactly like him, down to the dirt on his pants and the sweat on his forehead. It stood perfectly still, locked in the rest step position. Kevin reached out to touch it. The moment his hand made contact, he felt it, a draining sensation like standing up too fast. The frozen Kevin collapsed into motion, continuing its single step forward, completing the rest step. The figure walked 1 pace and vanished. Kevin stumbled backward. He'd released the paused moment, let it complete its step. The echo had been holding potential energy, a single step frozen in time, waiting to be released. Over the next hour, Kevin found every rest step he'd created. Each one was still there, frozen and waiting. He touched each figure, releasing them, watching them complete their single step before vanishing. It felt wrong to leave them paused forever. But then Kevin thought about the thousands of rest steps he'd taken over 8 years. Every trail he'd maintained, every hike he'd done, every mountain he'd climbed. If each pause left an echo, there were thousands of frozen Kevins scattered across the Appalachian Trail, all holding single steps, all waiting to complete their motion. He couldn't release them all. There were too many spread across too much distance. Kevin would spend the rest of his life hiking trails, trying to find his own paused moments, never finishing. That night, Kevin didn't sleep. He lay in his tent listening to the sounds of someone else camping nearby. The parallel campsite was active again, going through a routine identical to his. He realized what it was. Every night he'd camped on trail, he'd paused eating dinner, paused setting up his tent, paused dozens of times during evening routines. Each pause left an echo. The other campsite was his own pauses accumulated over years, playing out in parallel. All the moments he'd stopped to rest, to think, to simply exist without motion. They were all still here, frozen and repeating. Kevin abandoned his work site the next morning. He hiked out quickly, not taking a single rest step, forcing himself to walk continuously even when exhausted. At the trailhead, he threw his gear in his truck and drove to the ATC office. He tried to explain what he'd experienced, but it sounded insane even to him. His supervisor listened patiently, then suggested Kevin take some time off. Burnout was common among trail maintainers. Isolation could cause hallucinations. Kevin agreed to a 2-week break, but during those 2 weeks, Kevin couldn't stop thinking about his paused moments. He started researching, looking for similar reports. He found them scattered through hiking forums and trip reports. People describing glimpses of hikers frozen mid-stride, figures that appeared and disappeared, campsites where sounds repeated in parallel. Most people dismiss these experiences as tricks of light or exhaustion. But Kevin knew better. The trail remembered pauses. Every rest step, every brief stop, every moment of stillness left an imprint. And those imprints accumulated over time, creating a population of frozen hikers, all paused mid-motion, all waiting to complete their next step. Kevin returned to trail maintenance work, but he changed his technique. He never used rest steps anymore. He hiked continuously or stopped completely, avoiding those brief pauses that created echoes. His efficiency dropped. He got more tired, needed more breaks. But he couldn't stand the thought of leaving more frozen versions of himself scattered through the forest. Other maintainers noticed his changed hiking style and asked about it. Kevin tried to explain, but no one believed him. They still used rest steps, still paused briefly dozens of times each hike. Kevin started seeing their echoes too. Frozen hikers everywhere, all locked in brief pauses, all waiting to complete steps they'd never finish. He requested a transfer to a different section, thinking maybe the Tennessee trails were unique. But the echoes were everywhere. North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, every trail section held frozen hikers paused mid-stride, invisible most of the time but occasionally glimpsed. Kevin quit his job in March. He couldn't maintain trails knowing what he knew, seeing what he saw. He tried to warn other maintainers, tried to explain the rest step problem. They thought he'd lost his mind. Sometimes Kevin drives past trailheads and watches hikers disappear into the forest. He wonders how many pauses they'll create, how many frozen echoes they'll leave behind. The Appalachian Trail is 2,190 miles long. Millions of people have hiked it. If even a fraction used rest steps, the trail is populated by countless frozen moments. Invisible hikers paused forever, holding single steps they'll never complete. Unless someone touches them, unless someone releases them. Kevin wonders if that's what the glimpses are. Accidentally brushing against frozen moments, releasing steps that were paused decades ago. Hikers from the 1960s completing single steps in 2023. a trail populated not just by current hikers but by every pause ever taken waiting for release. Kevin doesn't hike anymore, but sometimes late at night he feels it. A frozen moment, a pause he left on a trail years ago. His body locked mid-stride, right leg extended, waiting to complete a step. He's not sure where it is, which trail, which mountain. But it's still there, holding his energy, waiting for him to come back and release it. A version of himself that never finished walking, frozen between one step and the next, possibly forever. Story 8. The Blaze Reader. Amanda Torres started seeing the hidden blazes in her second week on the Appalachian Trail. She was attempting a through hike, starting from Springer Mountain in Georgia, aiming for Katahdin in Maine. The white blazes that marked the official trail were easy to follow. 2 by 6 inch white paint rectangles on trees guiding millions of hikers north for decades. But on day 9, Amanda noticed another blaze. It was red, the same size and shape as the white blazes, but painted on a tree about 10 feet off the trail. She almost missed it, catching it only in her peripheral vision. Amanda stepped off the trail to examine it. The red paint looked old, faded by weather and time. She checked her trail guide. No mention of red blazes in this section. Blue blazes marked side trails to shelters and water sources, but red wasn't part of the standard system. Amanda took a photo and continued hiking. Over the next few days, she saw more red blazes, always off the main trail. Always barely visible, always painted on trees in positions where you'd only see them if you were looking. Amanda started watching for them, and the more she looked, the more she found. They formed a pattern parallel to the white blazes, sometimes 20 feet off trail, sometimes 50, but always there. At the next shelter, Amanda asked other through hikers about the red blazes. No one else had seen them. A section hiker named Derek said he'd been on the trail for 3 weeks and only noticed white and blue blazes. Amanda showed him her photos. Derek squinted at the images. "I can barely see that. Are you sure it's paint and not just a weird mark on the bark?" Amanda was sure. The shapes were too regular, too consistent. Someone had painted a parallel trail marking system, and only she seemed to notice it. On day 15, Amanda decided to follow the red blazes. She stepped off the white blaze trail and bushwhacked toward a red blaze she'd spotted. When she reached it, she found a faint footpath, not maintained like the AT, but definitely a trail. She followed it, and 50 yards later found another red blaze. The red trail ran parallel to the white trail, weaving through forest that looked slightly different. Older trees, thicker undergrowth, less sign of human passage. Amanda hiked the red trail for an hour, finding blazes every 100 yards. Then it curved back and rejoined the AT. Amanda couldn't find information about the red blazes in any guidebook or online forum. But now that she was looking, she saw them everywhere. Not just red either. Yellow blazes, green blazes, orange blazes. All faded and old, all marking paths that diverged from the official trail. On day 22, Amanda met an older hiker at a shelter in North Carolina. A man in his 70s with weathered gear and the lean build of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the woods. His trail name was Compass, and he'd through-hiked the AT 6 times. Amanda asked him about the colored blazes. Compass's expression darkened. "You're a reader." "A what?" "A blaze reader. Some people see them, most don't." The colored blazes are old trails, paths that existed before the official AT. Native American trails, settler paths, game trails. They're still there underneath the modern trail. Most hikers walk right past them, only seeing the white blazes, but readers see all of them. Why are they marked? Because trails don't die. They get covered over, rerouted, officially abandoned, but the paths remain. Someone marked them decades ago, maybe longer. The paint fades but never fully disappears. And once you start seeing them, you can't stop. Amanda felt a chill. What do you mean I can't stop? Compass pulled out a trail map covered in colored marks. I'm a reader too. Started seeing the blazes on my second through hike in 1983. By my third hike, I was seeing dozens of different colors. By my fourth, I was seeing hundreds. The forest is full of trails, Amanda. Layer upon layer, century upon century. The AT is just the newest one, and it's only 90 years old. Underneath are trails that are thousands of years old. He showed her his map. Every section of the AT had colored lines branching off in dozens of directions. Compass had documented red, yellow, green, orange, purple, brown, and black blazes. Each color represented a different era of trail use. The red blazes were from the 1930s, failed attempts to route the AT before the current path was finalized. Yellow blazes were older, possibly from logging operations in the 1800s. Green blazes were older still. How old is the oldest? Amanda asked. Black blazes, I've only seen a few. They're not paint. They're carved into rocks, marked on stone. Those trails are ancient, pre-Columbian maybe. Following them is dangerous. Why? Because they don't lead to the same place anymore. A trail from 1,000 years ago had different destinations. The landscape has changed. Rivers move, valleys flood, mountains erode. Following ancient trails can take you to places that don't exist on modern maps. Amanda thought Compass was exaggerating or possibly unstable from too many years alone in the woods. But that night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the red blazes, the parallel paths, the layers of trails stacked through time. The next morning, Amanda decided to test Compass's theory. She found a section where red, yellow, and white blazes were all visible from the same spot. She hiked the white trail first, timing herself. The section took 45 minutes to cover. Then she backtracked and followed the red blazes. The path was rougher, slower going, but it took her to the same destination in 52 minutes. Then she followed the yellow blazes. These were harder to see, the paint almost completely faded. The trail they marked was barely visible, more of a suggestion than a path. Amanda bushwhacked along the yellow route. It took her an hour and 20 minutes to reach the same endpoint. But here's what disturbed her. The yellow trail showed different terrain. The white and red trails crossed a valley floor. The yellow trail stayed higher on the ridge. When Amanda checked historical elevation maps, she found that the valley had been flooded by a dam project in 1948. Before that, it had been much higher. The yellow trail reflected the old terrain, not the current landscape. Amanda became obsessed with the blazes. She started photographing every colored mark she found, documenting their positions following paths that diverged from the AT. She fell behind her planned schedule, taking detours to explore ancient trails. On day 38, Amanda found a black blaze. It was carved into a boulder near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. Not painted, but chiseled. A 2-by-6-inch rectangle cut into the granite, weathered smooth by centuries of exposure. Amanda touched the carving and felt something shift in her perception. The forest looked different. The trees seemed older, positioned differently. The trail at her feet became less distinct, like it was fading. She looked around and saw more black blazes carved into rocks and trees, marking a path that headed east, away from the AT. Amanda followed the black blazed trail. It led upward along a ridge that didn't appear on her modern maps. The terrain felt wrong, like she was walking through a landscape that existed at a different time. She hiked for 2 hours, finding black blazes every 50 yards. The trail ended at a valley that shouldn't exist. Amanda checked her GPS. According to the device, she was standing on a mountaintop, but she was clearly in a valley. She could see ridges rising on both sides. The GPS insisted she was at 3,800 feet elevation, but the valley floor felt like it was at 2,000 feet. Amanda tried to backtrack, but the black blazes were gone. The trail she'd followed had disappeared. She spent 6 hours trying to find her way back to the AT, bushwhacking through forest that seemed to resist her movement. Trees stood where she swore there'd been clear ground. Creeks flowed in directions that defied gravity. When she finally stumbled back onto the white blaze trail, it was dark. Amanda was disoriented, exhausted, and terrified. She checked her GPS tracking. The device showed her hiking in circles for 6 hours, never more than a mile from the AT. But Amanda had felt like she'd traveled much further, into terrain that existed in a different time. She hiked to the next shelter and found Compass there. He took one look at her and said, "You followed black blazes." Amanda nodded, too tired to speak. "Don't do that again. Black trails don't follow current reality. They lead to landscapes from before European contact, before major geological changes. The paths are still there, metaphysically, but physically the terrain has changed. You can get lost in the discontinuity. Why didn't you warn me?" "I did. I told you they were dangerous." Over the next weeks, Amanda tried to stop seeing the colored blazes. She focused only on white blazes, forced herself to ignore the peripheral marks. But it was impossible. Once you became a blaze reader, Compass had said, you couldn't stop. The colors were always there, marking paths through time, showing all the layers of trails that had ever existed. Amanda's through hike became fractured. She'd hike the white trail for days, making good progress. Then she'd spot a colored blaze and feel compelled to follow it. She'd lose hours or days exploring ancient paths, returning to the AT disoriented and behind schedule. Other hikers noticed her erratic progress. Amanda would appear at shelters she'd supposedly passed days ago. Her GPS tracks stopped making sense. Her journal entries described terrain features that didn't exist on maps. By Virginia, Amanda was following colored blazes more than white ones. She'd see a faded orange blaze and spend a day following it, emerging onto the AT miles from where she'd left it. She'd find green blazes and follow them to ridges that weren't on any map. The forest became a palimpsest of trails, each layer visible to her, all competing for attention. White blazes were just the surface. Below them were dozens of other trails, hundreds of years of paths, all still existing if you knew how to see them. Amanda reached Harper's Ferry, the psychological halfway point of the AT, 3 weeks behind schedule. She weighed herself at the ATC headquarters and had lost 30 pounds. The staff were concerned, suggesting she take time off. But Amanda couldn't stop. The blazes were calling her, showing her trails no one else could see. In Pennsylvania, Amanda followed a purple blaze and ended up in a town that didn't exist. She walked down a main street with wooden buildings and unpaved roads. People in period clothing stared at her. She asked what town she was in, and they said Millhaven. Amanda later looked it up. Millhaven existed from 1840 to 1885, when it was abandoned after a flood. The town site was now forest. Amanda had walked into a trail that existed in 1850, and briefly she'd existed in 1852. She quit her through hike in New York. She couldn't continue. The blazes were too intense, the layers too numerous. Every step showed her dozens of trails, paths from different eras, all equally real. The white blazes of the official AT were just one option among thousands. Amanda returned home but couldn't adjust to normal life. She saw trails everywhere. Sidewalks had colored blazes showing where ancient paths had been paved over. Roads marked trails that had existed before colonization. The modern landscape was just the surface layer, and Amanda could see through it to all the previous versions. She contacted Compass, who'd finished his 6th through hike. He told her there was no cure for being a blaze reader. You learned to live with it or you went mad. Some readers spent their entire lives following ancient trails, disappearing into landscapes that didn't exist anymore, lost in the layers of time. Amanda tried to warn other hikers about the colored blazes, posting in forums and writing blog entries. Most people thought she was crazy. A few contacted her privately, saying they'd started seeing the blazes too. Amanda maintains a database now documenting colored blazes along the entire AT. She has thousands of entries: red, yellow, green, orange, purple, brown, black, and colors she can't name. Trails from every era, all still existing, all still marked. She doesn't hike anymore, but sometimes she drives to trailheads and watches hikers start their journeys. She wonders how many will become readers. How many will start seeing the colored blazes, the ancient paths, the layers of trails stacked through centuries. Most people finish their through hikes seeing only white blazes, never knowing they walked past thousands of other trails. But a few will see, and once they do, they'll never stop seeing. The forest is full of paths, and all of them are still being walked by hikers from every era, following blazes that never fade. Story 9. The Heat Signature. Jordan Mitchell bought a thermal scope for his overnight solo hike through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. He'd been section hiking the Appalachian Trail for 4 years and wanted to try something different. The thermal scope was marketed to hunters, claiming it could detect heat signatures from up to 500 yards. Jordan thought it would be useful for spotting wildlife at night. He started his hike on November 2nd when the New Hampshire forests were cold and empty of summer crowds. The trail was clear but challenging, with early season snow patches above 3,000 feet. Jordan planned a 3-day loop covering about 30 miles, with 2 nights camping in remote areas. The first day was uneventful. Jordan hiked 12 miles, set up camp at an established site, and cooked dinner as darkness fell. The temperature dropped into the 20s. After eating, he decided to test his thermal scope. He turned it on and pointed it into the forest. The scope showed the world in false colors, with warm objects appearing bright against the cold background. Trees and rocks were dark blue. Small animals appeared as yellow-orange blobs. The scope worked perfectly. Jordan panned across the forest and froze. About 100 yards from his campsite, there was a human-shaped heat signature, bright red-orange, indicating body temperature around 98 degrees. The figure stood motionless between 2 trees. Jordan called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. The figure didn't move. Jordan grabbed his flashlight and pointed it toward the location. Nothing visible, just dark forest. He looked through the thermal scope again. The figure was still there, glowing warmly, clearly, human-shaped. Jordan's heart rate increased. Someone was standing in the dark forest watching his camp, not responding to calls. He considered his options. Confronting a stranger in darkness was dangerous, but so was ignoring someone who might be in distress or need help. He decided to wait. Jordan kept his scope trained on the figure, watching for movement. For 20 minutes, it stood perfectly still. Then gradually it began to fade. The bright orange color dimmed to yellow, then green, then blue, then disappeared entirely. Like watching a body cool to match the ambient temperature. Jordan checked with his flashlight. Still nothing visible. He waited another hour, scanning with the thermal scope periodically. The figure didn't reappear. Jordan eventually crawled into his sleeping bag, though he didn't sleep well. At dawn, Jordan hiked to the location where he'd seen the heat signature. No tracks in the snow, no disturbance, no evidence anyone had stood there. He marked the GPS coordinates and continued his hike. Around noon, Jordan took a break at a vista point. He decided to scan with the thermal scope during daylight, curious about what wildlife might be visible. He panned across the forest below and saw them. Dozens of human-shaped heat signatures scattered through the trees, all standing motionless. Some glowed bright orange, others were dimmer yellow or green. Jordan's hands shook as he counted. 27 distinct figures, all within 400 yards of the trail. None were visible with normal vision. The scope was revealing something impossible. He hiked faster, wanting to reach the next shelter where there might be other people. Every few miles, Jordan would stop and scan with the thermal scope. Each time he saw more standing figures. Always motionless, always human-shaped, always invisible without thermal imaging. At the shelter, Jordan found two other hikers, a couple from Vermont named Mike and Rachel. He told them about the heat signatures, expecting them to think he was crazy. Instead, Mike's expression turned serious. "You're seeing the standing stones," Mike said. "What?" Rachel explained. "There's a legend about the White Mountains. People who died on the trails, exposure victims, lost hikers. Their body heat supposedly lingers, marking the locations where they died. We've heard stories about thermal imaging showing human-shaped heat sources where no one is standing." "That's insane." "Maybe. But the White Mountains have killed a lot of people over the years. Hundreds of documented deaths from exposure, falls, avalanches. If heat persists somehow." Jordan wanted to dismiss this as folklore, but he'd seen the signatures. Dozens of them, all along the trail. He asked Mike and Rachel if they had any thermal equipment. They didn't, but they agreed to look at Jordan's scope. At dusk, Jordan pointed the scope into the forest surrounding the shelter. The standing figures were there. Mike and Rachel could see them through the scope, confirming Jordan wasn't hallucinating. 20-plus human-shaped heat sources scattered around the shelter, all motionless. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered. "They're real." Mike wanted to investigate. Against Jordan's better judgment, they hiked toward the nearest heat signature with flashlights. The thermal scope showed it clearly, a bright orange human form about 60 yards from the shelter. But as they approached, they found nothing. No person, no animal, no warm object. Just cold forest. Yet through the scope, the figure remained visible. They could walk right through the space where it appeared to be standing, feeling nothing, seeing nothing with their eyes. But the scope insisted something warm and human-shaped was there. Mike had a theory. What if it's not current heat? What if thermal energy can somehow be imprinted on a location? Like a recording. The person died here, their body heat was at this spot, and it left a permanent mark. "Heat doesn't work that way," Jordan said. "We're looking at it work that way right now." They returned to the shelter. None of them slept well. The next morning, Mike and Rachel decided to hike out early, cutting their trip short. They wanted off this trail section. Jordan considered joining them, but decided to continue his planned route. He wanted to understand what he was seeing. Over the next day, Jordan began documenting the heat signatures. He marked their GPS coordinates, took photos through the thermal scope, noted their positions. He found patterns. The signatures were concentrated around certain areas, old shelter sites that had been relocated, steep sections of trail known for accidents, ridge lines exposed to severe weather. Jordan cross-referenced his findings with White Mountain death records. In several cases, the heat signatures aligned with documented fatality locations. A hiker who died of exposure in 2003 found near a rock formation. Jordan's scope showed a heat signature at that exact spot. Another hiker who'd fallen in 1987 discovered at the base of a cliff. Heat signature present. But there were far more heat signatures than documented deaths. Jordan was seeing hundreds, and he'd only covered 30 miles. If the entire White Mountain Trail system showed this density, there would be thousands of standing heat sources marking locations where people had died over centuries. On his final night, Jordan camped near Crawford Notch. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally. The constant awareness that he was hiking through a forest full of invisible heat signatures was taking its toll. He set up his tent, ate a cold dinner, and tried to sleep. At midnight, he woke to strange sounds outside his tent, rustling like something moving through his campsite. Jordan grabbed his thermal scope and looked out through the mesh door. The forest was full of heat signatures. Not standing anymore, walking. Dozens of human-shaped forms, all moving slowly through the trees, all glowing orange and red, all heading in the same direction. North, toward higher elevations. Jordan watched in frozen terror as the procession passed within feet of his tent. The heat signatures moved like hikers, same gait, same pace. Through the tent mesh, Jordan could see nothing with his naked eye, but through the scope, it looked like a massive group hike happening in the middle of the night. The procession lasted 15 minutes. Jordan counted over 60 distinct figures. Then they were gone, disappeared into the forest to the north. Jordan didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, he packed quickly and hiked out. He drove straight home, 3 hours south to Massachusetts, and didn't hike for 6 weeks. But he couldn't stop thinking about the heat signatures. He researched thermal imaging, trying to find scientific explanations. Nothing made sense. Heat dissipates. It doesn't linger for years or decades. It certainly doesn't move around. Jordan found a forum for paranormal investigators and posted his findings. Several people responded with similar stories. Thermal scopes showing human-shaped heat sources in locations known for deaths. A hunter in Colorado who'd seen dozens of heat signatures on a mountain where a mining accident had killed 42 people in 1895. A search and rescue worker in Alaska who documented heat signatures at every location where they'd recovered bodies over 20 years. One response stood out. A physics professor who studied thermodynamics. He had a theory. Heat wasn't persisting. What thermal scopes were detecting was something else. A form of energy released at the moment of death, particularly traumatic death. This energy mimicked heat signatures but wasn't actually thermal. It lingered at death sites indefinitely, visible only to instruments designed to detect infrared radiation. The professor called them Thanatos signatures, death markers. Every traumatic death left one imprinted on the location, visible to thermal imaging. Most people never saw them because most people didn't use thermal scopes in the wilderness. But they were there. Thousands of them, marking every violent end. Jordan returned to the White Mountains in spring with better thermal equipment. Professional-grade scopes used by military and law enforcement. The resolution was higher, the range longer. He hiked the same section and was overwhelmed by what he saw. The forest was crowded with Thanatos signatures, hundreds per mile. Some were clearly old, dimmer and less distinct. Others were bright and recent. Jordan could estimate the age of a death by the signature's intensity. The brightest ones were from the past 5 years. The dimmest were possibly centuries old. He began mapping them, creating a database of death locations. Jordan contacted hiking organizations with his findings, suggesting they cross-reference his data with accident reports. Most dismissed him as a crank, but a few search and rescue coordinators took him seriously. One admitted they'd found similar patterns using thermal drones for body recovery. Jordan's obsession with Thanatos signatures cost him his job and his relationship. He spent all his time hiking, scanning, documenting. The White Mountains became his laboratory. He'd covered over 300 miles of trail, marking thousands of death sites. He discovered that some signatures moved, not walking exactly but shifting slowly over time, like the energy was migrating along paths. Jordan theorized that Thanatos signatures followed the routes the dying person had intended to take, their final destination never reached, pulling the signature forward. The procession he'd witnessed that night was signatures moving north toward Mount Washington. Jordan checked historical records and found that hundreds of hikers had died attempting Washington's summit over the decades. Maybe their Thanatos signatures were still trying to reach the top, still climbing, still hiking the route they'd never completed. Jordan doesn't hike without thermal equipment anymore. The normal visible spectrum seems incomplete to him now. He knows the forest is full of invisible presences, energy signatures marking violent ends, all still present, some still moving. The Appalachian Trail isn't hiked just by living people. It's crowded with Thanatos signatures, thousands of them, each marking a hiker who started a journey they never finished. He warns other hikers about using thermal scopes in the wilderness. Most don't listen, but a few have contacted him after seeing their own heat signatures. They describe the same thing Jordan saw: forests full of standing figures glowing orange and red, invisible to the naked eye. Death markers everywhere, showing just how many people the mountains have claimed. Jordan's database contains 4,947 distinct Thanatos signatures along 300 miles of the Appalachian Trail in the White Mountains. Extrapolated across the entire 2,190-mile trail, he estimates there are over 30,000 deaths marked by persistent energy signatures, all still present, all still visible if you know how to look. The trail isn't empty. It's crowded with the dead, and they're all still hiking. Story 10. The Step Count. Brianna Walsh's fitness tracker died on day 12 of her through hike. She was somewhere in North Carolina pushing through the Nantahala section when the device stopped syncing. She tried resetting it, charging it with her portable battery, but nothing worked. The tracker was dead, except it kept counting steps. The screen was black, no display, no response to button presses. But when Brianna opened the fitness app on her phone, the step count was updating. She watched the number tick upward with each step she took: 47,892, 47,893, 47,894. Brianna assumed the tracker was somehow transmitting despite the dead screen. Bluetooth could work without a display. She'd deal with getting a replacement when she reached the next town. For now, she kept hiking and the app kept counting. By the end of day 12, her step count was 62,307, normal for a big mile day on the AT. Brianna made camp, ate dinner, and crawled into her sleeping bag. She checked the app one last time before sleeping. 62,307 steps. In the morning, the app showed 73,456 steps. Brianna stared at her phone. She'd been sleeping. She hadn't taken 11,000 steps overnight. The tracker must be malfunctioning, counting random movements or generating false data. She tried to delete the app and reinstall it, but her phone had no signal in this section. She'd have to wait until the next town. She started hiking. The step count climbed normally for the first hour. Then something strange happened. Brianna stopped to adjust her pack, standing completely still for 30 seconds. The step count continued increasing: 74,892, 74,893, 74,894. Brianna took off her dead fitness tracker and threw it in her pack. She stood motionless, watching her phone. The steps kept counting: 74,940, 74,941, 74,942. She wasn't moving. The tracker was in her pack, not on her wrist, but her step count was increasing steadily, about 3 steps per second. Walking pace. Brianna sat down hard on a rock. The counting continued: 75,003, 75,004, 75,005. Someone or something was taking her steps. The app was recording movement she wasn't making. She tried everything, logged out of the app, logged back in. Same step count, still climbing. Turned off Bluetooth, still counting. Put her phone in airplane mode. The count continued increasing. Brianna wasn't taking steps, but her account was recording them anyway. By noon, when Brianna had actually hiked about 6 miles, her step count showed she'd walked 14 miles. The false steps were accumulating faster than her real ones. She tried to rationalize it. GPS error, app malfunction, cloud sync issue. But none of those explained why the counting was so precise and consistent. Exactly 3 steps per second, never stopping, always adding to her total. At the next shelter, Brianna asked other hikers if they'd experienced similar issues. No one had. A thru hiker named Trevor looked at her app and frowned. "That's weird. Your step count is increasing while you're standing still." "I know, it's been doing that since last night." Trevor watched for a minute. "It's counting someone else's steps, someone with your account credentials." "I don't share my account." "Could someone have hacked it? Fitness apps have been compromised before." Brianna changed her password using Trevor's phone hotspot. The step count didn't stop. It kept climbing, steady and relentless. She was now credited with 91,245 steps for the day, but she'd only walked about 28,000. That night, Brianna turned off her phone completely. She removed the battery from her dead fitness tracker and buried it in her food bag. She wanted to eliminate every possible source of the counting. In the morning, she powered on her phone and checked the app. 118,766 steps. She'd been sleeping. Phone off, tracker disabled, but her account showed she'd taken another 27,000 steps overnight. Brianna did the math. That was about 2.5 hours of continuous walking at normal pace. Someone was hiking on her account while she slept. Brianna tried to contact customer support for the fitness app, but she had limited signal. She managed to send an email describing the problem and asking them to freeze her account. No response came. Over the next 3 days, the phantom steps continued accumulating. Brianna would hike her planned miles, maybe 35,000 steps, but her app would show 70,000. The extra steps appeared in batches, mostly at night, but sometimes during the day when she was resting. On day 16, Brianna noticed something disturbing in her detailed activity log. The phantom steps weren't random. They followed a route. The GPS tracking in her app showed 2 paths. Her real path moving north along the AT through North Carolina, and a phantom path also moving north but at a different pace and on a slightly different route. The phantom hiker was covering more ground than Brianna. Bigger mile days, fewer rest breaks. According to the app, the phantom hiker was about 40 miles ahead of Brianna's actual position. Brianna zoomed in on the phantom hiker's route. It followed the AT exactly, hitting all the same landmarks, shelters, and trail junctions. But it showed consistent 30-mile days with hiking continuing through the night. No one could maintain that pace. It was superhuman. At the next town, Brianna went to an outfitter and asked if anyone had reported seeing a hiker matching her description ahead on the trail. The clerk checked their trail register. Several hikers had signed in from positions ahead of where Brianna should be. None matched her name or description. But one entry caught Brianna's attention. A hiker had written, "Day 16, mile 247, feeling strange. Someone is walking behind me, but no one is there." Brianna was on day 16. The phantom steps in her app showed mile 247. She checked the date on the trail register. The entry was from 3 days ago. The hiker who wrote it had been at mile 247 on day 16, exactly where Brianna's phantom steps placed her. Brianna asked if anyone knew who'd written the entry. The clerk checked the signature. "Looks like someone named Marcus Chen. He checked in here 2 days ago, resupplying, seemed okay." Continued north. Brianna's hands were shaking. Her phantom steps were somehow connected to Marcus Chen. Her app was tracking his movements or something related to him. She needed to find him and figure out what was happening. She hiked hard for the next 2 days, pushing 25-mile days, trying to catch up to where Marcus should be. Her phantom steps showed him at mile 310. According to her calculations, she might reach him in 3 more days if she maintained her pace and he didn't increase his. On day 19, Brianna encountered a southbound hiker who'd just come from the section ahead. She asked about Marcus Chen. The southbounder's expression turned somber. "You haven't heard? Search and rescue found his body yesterday. He fell from a ridge near mile 285. They think he'd been dead for about 3 days." Brianna felt ice in her stomach. 3 days? What day did he die? They estimate day 16. Why? Day 16 was when Brianna's phantom steps had reached mile 247. The same day Marcus had written in the trail register about someone walking behind him. Her app had been tracking Marcus, and when he died, it didn't stop. The phantom steps continued, hiking Marcus's intended route, covering the miles he never would. Brianna checked her app. The phantom steps had stopped at mile 285, the exact location where Marcus's body was found. No more steps were accumulating. The counting had frozen at 342,181 total steps. She contacted the search and rescue team and explained the situation. They were skeptical but interested. One of the rescuers asked if she could share her app data. Brianna sent them everything. 2 days later, the rescuer called her. "Your app tracked him exactly. Every step he took on day 16, your app recorded. After he died, it continued tracking something for 3 more days. Whatever it was moved north from his death site, covering about 40 more miles before stopping. What was it tracking? We don't know. But here's the disturbing part. We found another body. Mile 285.7, just 3/4 of a mile from where Marcus fell. Older body, been there for weeks. Hiker who went missing in April, and guess what? His fitness tracker was still active, still counting steps for 2 months after he died. His account showed him hiking north, same route, same pattern, continuous movement, no stops. Brianna felt sick. How many bodies? We're checking now. But if fitness trackers keep counting steps after their users die and those steps show the bodies moving, we might have a way to locate missing hikers. Your phantom steps might have just revolutionized search and rescue. Over the next week, search teams used fitness tracking data from missing hikers to locate 6 more bodies along the AT. All of them had active trackers that continued recording steps after death. The phantom movement always followed the trail north, always at walking pace, always stopping at locations where other bodies were eventually found. Brianna's app finally stopped showing phantom steps after Marcus's body was recovered. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been walking her route, using her steps, moving ahead of her. The fitness tracker had connected her to Marcus somehow, linked their journeys, and when he died, it had continued his hike through her account. She quit her through hike in Virginia. The experience had broken something in her. Every step felt like it wasn't entirely her own, like she was sharing the trail with phantom hikers, people who died but whose trackers kept counting, kept recording, kept hiking. Brianna researched fitness tracking algorithms. She learned that modern trackers use sophisticated motion sensors and AI to predict movement patterns. They learn your gait, your pace, your habits. When the tracker dies or loses signal, the AI continues predicting steps based on what it learned about your walking pattern. But that didn't explain Marcus. Brianna's tracker had never been near Marcus. They'd never shared data, yet somehow her device had locked onto him, tracked him, and continued tracking something after his death. A data scientist contacted Brianna after reading about her experience. He had a theory. Fitness trackers communicate with each other, sharing anonymous data to improve algorithms. When Marcus died, his tracker stopped receiving feedback but kept transmitting. Brianna's tracker, the closest active device on the trail, picked up his signal and integrated it into her data stream. Essentially, the scientist explained, your tracker adopted his ghost. It started tracking his movements because his tracker was broadcasting but not receiving confirmation. The algorithm interpreted his continued transmission as valid step data and merged it with yours. But why did it keep counting after he died? because his tracker had learned his gait perfectly. Even after Marcus stopped moving, the tracker continued predicting his steps based on its learned model of how he walked. It was generating ghost data, and your tracker was recording it. Brianna asked how many other hikers might be experiencing this. The scientist didn't know, but he suggested that every active fitness tracker on the Appalachian Trail was potentially receiving ghost data from dead hikers whose devices kept transmitting. Phantom steps accumulated over years, all being counted in the accounts of living hikers. Brianna deleted her fitness app and never used a tracker again. But sometimes, late at night, she wonders about those phantom steps. 342,281 steps that weren't hers. About 170 miles that someone else walked or was supposed to walk or is still walking in some digital afterlife. The Appalachian Trail is 2,190 miles long, roughly 5 million steps from Georgia to Maine. Hundreds of hikers have died on the trail over the decades. If their trackers kept counting, kept predicting, kept generating ghost data, how many phantom steps are being recorded right now? How many living hikers are carrying the ghost steps of the dead, their accounts inflated by the movements of people who never finished their journeys? Brianna doesn't know, but she's heard from other thru hikers who've experienced similar phenomena. Step counts that don't match their actual hiking. Phantom routes on GPS tracking. The sense that someone is walking ahead of them just out of sight, taking their steps. The trail doesn't forget it's dead. And with fitness trackers, the dead don't stop hiking. They keep walking, their algorithms predicting steps they'll never take. Their data merging with living hikers, creating a population of phantom walkers who exist only in the cloud, counting steps forever on a trail that never ends.